Hi guys, James at RampantLionReviews again for you today with another beer review. As you might have guessed from the background, we are back in Scotland, so as I always do when I come home, I'm going to do a review from one of my local breweries again. So this time we are going to go to Alva here in Clackmannanshire and visit one of Scotland's oldest craft breweries. So we're going to Harviestoun Brewery this time and we're having a taste of the Órach Slie, which is a barrel-aged lager beer. This one is a special version of their Shiehallion lager, which is originally brewed to 8% and then it's barrel-aged in Glenfarclas casks for 6 months. Glenfarclas, of course, are a family-owned distillery from up in Speyside, so this should be a really interesting beer. This is from the same series as their kind of famous Órach beers, which are barrel-aged versions of the old engine oil, which the brewery is quite well known for, of course, but this is the first time I'm trying one of these special beers from them, so I hope it's a good one. It should be really quite nice. This guy was rated 66 overall on Rate Beer, but 94 within the lager style, so should be quite an interesting beer. I always enjoy a good lager. A lot of craft beer people don't really enjoy lagers so much, but I think it's a kind of style that you really have to appreciate for just kind of how universal it is more than anything. But looking forward to trying this beer, and I hope you guys enjoy the review. But anyway, as is usual with my beer reviews then, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery. If you do want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews I've done from Harviestoun before. This must be Harviestoun review number 7 or 8 if I'm not mistaken. There's all the usual social media. If you want to see more beer reviews, do subscribe to the channel. The whole channel uses a geography based tagging system, so you can go into the homepage and search for beer based on country, city or state, whatever you're interested in. There's also playlists for the beers from different countries. You can check out my sake and whiskey reviews as well, and please do get in touch and let me know some of the other beers and breweries you guys would like to see me review. Always interesting to hear from you guys, and your support is muchly appreciated. So anyway, to tell you a little bit about Harviestoun Brewery, so these guys are one of the oldest craft breweries in Scotland. The brewery was founded back in 1983 by Ken Brooker, who actually used to homebrew, and he would invite people around to his house every Sunday or something like that to taste all of his beers, and he would make them fill in tasting notes. But a few years later he decided that he wanted to brew for a living, so he converted an old steading in Dollar into a small brewery back in 1986, and at this time much of his equipment was old dairy equipment and it was a largely homemade brewery. But over the following few years they gradually added more beers to their repertoire, and this was after Ken decided to invest in the brewery in 1989, making it a fully kind of professionally kitted out brewery for the first time. But in 1994 they introduced their Shiehallion lager, which really has made a huge name for itself. I really enjoy that beer. As I said, this one is a kind of special version of that that's been barrel aged, and I always enjoy that beer on tap whenever I can find it here in Clackmannanshire, although it is a bit harder to find on tap than it is in bottle, right enough. But the big break for the brewery came in 1996 when they won at the Tesco Beer Challenge, and this resulted in the first bulk order for the brewery. Soon after this they launched the Bitter and Twisted beer, which is now their flagship beer, of course, and this really kicked off their exports over to America. Since the turn of the millennium, the brewery's become even more decorated, and they introduced the old engine oil porter, which really is a very, very popular export beer. This one has since been barrel aged to create the Órach series, and like I said, this kind of barrel aging project that they have, this beer is part of that actually. But in 2003 they moved to their new facility in Alva, which is just a few miles down the road from Dollar. But the brewery was sold to the Caledonian Brewery from Edinburgh in 2006, which was in turn bought by Heineken in 2008, and basically Heineken didn't want the Harviestoun Brewery, and then it was actually bought out by a group of Caledonian brewery directors, and it has kind of remained independent of them since then. So it is still an independent brewery, and it's the oldest and kind of original Clackmannanshire craft brewery. Of course, Williams Brothers, the other big craft brewery here, moved in a little bit later than that to Clackmannanshire, but we've got two very good breweries here, and of course this area here, Clackmannanshire, is very well known for having the whiskey bonds and things like that, and it's good that we've got some good craft beer as well. So yeah, really good little area. If you do want to come and visit Clackmannanshire in Scotland, I would recommend it, and have a little look at Stirling too, very historic city. But just to list the other beers you can get from Harviestoun, of course there's the Shiehallion, there's the Bitter and Twisted, the IPA now as well, which is a new addition, there's the Old Engineer's Oil, the Engineer's Reserve, the Ridge, the Órach, and there's the 12, 16 and 18 version of that. They also have the Broken Dial as well, which is a really nice amber ale, but that one is a little bit harder to find. And very recently, of course, I reviewed the Haggis Hunter for you, which is one that disappears and then reappears every so often. They do have a couple of different special edition beers that you can check out, especially usually it's different versions of the Órach series. But yeah, that's enough about the brewery just now. We'll actually get on to the tasting of this beer itself here. So I'll just tell you the specs of this beer before I let you have a look at the artwork. Like I said, this guy is a 6% lager beer. It actually starts off life as an 8% version of the Shiehallion lager beer. Then it's barrel aged in Glenfarclas casks for 6 months. It's hopped with Challenger, Hersbrucker, Slie and Bobek. The two latter hops in there are Slovenian, of course. There's Hersbrucker, which is from Germany, and I think Challenger might be an English or American hop. I'm not quite sure about that, but it has a malt base of wheat malt and lager malt as well. So yeah, it should be quite nice. I'll just like to have a look at the artwork on this one before we open it up. Let me just bring up the camera if I can find my cursor. There we are. As you can see, this is the kind of typical artwork you can expect from the Ólah series of beers. You can see Harvey the mouse just there. He's got a little red label on this one, Órach Slie, and Órach Slie of course is Gaelic for the golden nectar. It tells you a little bit about this beer in the card here. So it says Órach Slie is so named because of its vibrant amber colour and rich finish. This limited release has been matured in casks from the 175-year-old Glenfarclas distillery to add complementary whisky notes to what is already an amazing brew. It's elegant, crisp and has hints of citrus fruit. For more information visit harviestoun.com, and it tells you a little bit about the tasting notes here as well. On the side it's got a little tasting thing with it here. Tells you a bit about Glenfarclas on the back too. So it says, since 1865 Glenfarclas has been owned and managed by just one family, the Grants of Glenfarclas. To this day Glenfarclas is one of only a few distilleries in Scotland to remain family owned and managed. Now in the hands of the 5th and 6th generation of the family, the Grants remain committed to the vision of creating the best quality single Highland malt Scotch whisky in the traditional Speyside style with a heavy sherry influence. So yeah, this one should be quite cool. It's a good partnership that these guys have got too, and that is one of the things actually. A lot of people rave about the whisky in Scotland, but unfortunately I think it is one of the things that has been taken over by big companies rather than kind of remaining family owned, as it has done in for craft beer in a lot of places actually, although that seems to be the changing tide at the moment. But we'll get this guy out and into the glass now, and I tell you something, you can smell some of the lovely fruity notes off this beer actually as you're pouring it out. I'll definitely be keeping this bottle of course, and I will try and review some of the Ólah beers for you. This one of course, it just had the plain kind of cap on it, the usual Harviestoun cap with a little mouse and then this little foily thing over it. But as you can see, it's poured exactly as you would expect a lager beer to do actually. It's got a little bit of sediment in it, this one, but you can see it's crystal clear. I'll just bring up on this light and let you have a little look at it. You can see it's that nice rich kind of ambery colour there. There was a quarter finger of a frothy white head, and that's just faded away to be a very thin foamy layer. And I can tell you something, when I'm moving this beer about, you can really smell some of these spicy notes from that wood of course. You'll get a little bit of maybe, it's more kind of sort of oaky spice, but you also get a kind of vanilla character from it as well. So without sugaring this beer up, you really can smell that. It does really smell like sherry. My gran and grandpa, their sitting room in their house, they always used to like to go and sit in there and have a sherry, and I tell you something, this kind of smells like that room actually in their house, because you could always smell the sherry in there, and you can smell a little bit of that, the sort of woody character coming out of this lager beer. You can really smell that in there, that nice kind of slightly spicy sherry character coming out of this beer. There's a nice oaky character to it, bit of vanilla in there. You can pick out these kind of bready pale malts from the lager too, and it's quite an interesting experiment this. Not a lot of breweries would actually barrel age a lager beer of all things. Usually I've seen a couple of breweries do it with IPAs and double IPAs, but mainly it's imperial stouts and sometimes Scotch ales of course as well. They do it, usually it's darker beers of course, but I've never seen it done with a lager, so this is quite unique in that regard. So yeah, that nice woody spice is really just sitting there with this one. There's a bit of grassy and floral character coming out, quite a spicy aromatic thing, especially when you've got these Slovenian hops, the German Hersbrucker and then the Challenger hop, which I think, I'm sure it's an American hop rather than an English hop. But you've got that nice big floral aromaticity, that goes well with this woody spice in the beer. There's a bit of vanilla in there too. I'm getting a bit of earthy character coming out of this as well. It's that sort of earthy kind of grainy thing that you can get from whiskey too, and you can smell that it's just a little bit boozy. So take a little bit of time and enjoy the aroma of this one before you get stuck in. There's a little bit of kind of green appley sort of orchard ester coming out of this one too, but it should be really nice. Let's get stuck into this beer then. This one is the Órach Slie, which is basically means the gold nectar in Gaelic, and this one is a special version of the Shiehallion beer, barrel aged in Glenfarclas cask from Speyside for 6 months. Let's get stuck into this beer. Harviestoun Brewery, Slange. Now that's quite interesting. What I would say about this beer, just on the first taste, this one is nowhere near as kind of complex as some of the other Harviestoun ones you're going to come across. That's just on one sip, so we'll see if that changes over the next few. It comes across as quite a malty lager, this. So, the middle of your palate, you've got this sort of bready character. It's actually quite almost a pale malty character. It just goes right across the middle of your tongue. And it digs in, and you've got this sort of grainy, slightly grainy, dry character to this beer, and you can feel that woody spice coming out of this one. It does have a wee bit of the sherry character and some of the whiskey flavour, of course, as well, but it's that almost spicy character that's coming out of this one. But yeah, it's really nice. Yeah, I can see where the rating on Rate Beer for this one was coming from, because in comparison to what you can get from Harviestoun, I mean, the Órach series, like the old engine oil, really is a beautiful, beautiful beer. And, you know, given the choice of these different beers, you probably would always go for the Órach, just because of how the Órachs and the old engine oils, just because of how outstanding they are. So relative to that, I can get the kind of the overall rating of this one, but within the lager style, this one is actually really, really good. As I've said, there's a lot of craft beer people don't like lagers. They always rate lagers really kind of low down the pecking order, and one of the things is you have to admire when brewers do it, because it's a difficult style to master, actually. And I have to admit, I do enjoy a lager every so often. I like these, especially the German ones and the Czech ones and things like that, because they are unique to the area. They actually use proper hops in them in comparison to what you get over in America with the big breweries and things like that. Even the big breweries in Germany do use proper hops in their beer, and I love these things like what Harviestoun do. You get the craft takes on lager. Williams Brothers do that as well. They do these light session beers, and the craft breweries do lagers really nicely, so you have to appreciate that when you get kind of special ones like this, where they've experimented with it a little bit. And for me, this works quite well. It's very different from any other lager I've come across before. So yeah, like I said, middle of the palate, that nice kind of pale malt base. There's a bit of thicker breadiness to it. It's got some of the grainy character, but there's a lot of woody spice going on in there. It reminds me a little bit of the sherry, of course, and you've got that almost earthy malty character that you can sometimes get with whiskey, but that spiciness is just lingering there, and you can feel that becoming more and more dry as you progress into the aftertaste. In the back corners of the palate, you've got a nice little bit of earthy malt in there. As you come further forward, it becomes a little bit more floral, and around the front curve of the tongue, it's quite grassy. I'm getting a little bit of a kind of, there is a little bit of a vanilla flavour to this one. It said on the card that they think it's more of a cinnamon flavour that's giving you the spicy character in the middle of the palate. I wouldn't say it really tastes like cinnamon for me. It's the cinnamon I always find is quite a kind of sweet thing, and of course, living in Sweden most of the time, we have the cinnamon buns, of course. And it really doesn't taste like that kind of cinnamon to me. That's the type of cinnamon I'm used to. It's more like a woody, almost sherry and whiskey spice coming out of this beer. But it works really nicely. It's very interesting to try. So if you get the chance to come across this one, like I said, it is a limited edition, so have a go of it when you can find it. And that nose on this, just take a bit of time and enjoy the nose on this beer. I think it's fair to say with this one as well, there's a little bit of citrusy character just behind the front curve of the palate too. Maybe a bit of that kind of orchardy ester in this beer as well. There's a sort of a green apple kind of thing coming out with this one. But that really, the kind of dominant flavours in this beer, it's that kind of grainy character, the woody spice in this one with that little bit of sherry and the whiskey earthiness. The floral character from the hops and the earthiness there is lingering too. But, you know, overall, In terms of a lager beer, I think it's really nicely done. Barrel aging a lager beer, it can be quite interesting, but of course, it is the sort of question, is lager beers are more a kind of course, they're more a session beer rather than a sort of a sipper beer. So really for me, if I was brewing, I'd have that question, you know, is it worth investing all that time on the lager beer? I mean, they've only aged this for 60 days, right enough, so it is a bit of a short period of time, but if you're going to age a beer, then I do wonder if it should be if you want, when you're putting that amount of time in it, should you really do it more with an imperial stout where you're going to get more kind of complexity out of it, or of a Scotch ale or something like that? Is it really worth doing it for a lager? I'm not too sure about that, but what I would say is they've done this one pretty nicely. I do like this one. It's that whiskey and sort of sherry character that it has is quite interesting. Of course, you've got two companies involved with this one, Glenfarclas and Harviestoun. You've got two very well respected kind of Scottish producers in here, so it is a very cool beer to try, and I like the flavour of it. I really do enjoy the flavour of this one, so make sure you give this guy a go if you come across it. But I would say you have to appreciate sort of earthy and woody flavours to really get the full thing that's going on in this beer. So in terms of the mouthfeel of this one, I'd say that it's quite light-bodied, maybe pushing the mid-bodied category, and for a lager beer, it does feel a bit heavier than what you'd expect. The carbonation on this one is quite smooth. It's got a good bit of oily character to it as well, which I would say suits it, and that's probably from the barrel aging that's come in. You've got a little bit of sweetness from the malt base. It is kind of smooth, but overall there's a good bit of dry, kind of spicy character coming out of this one. You've got a bit of smoothness from the hops. The earthy character has a little bit of dryness, as does some of the floral character, but overall it's quite smooth and quite wet there, and there's a teeny little bit of fruity character. But other than that, you know, it is actually, it's a really nicely done beer. It's very different from any other lager you're going to come across, and when it's Harviestoun and Glenfarclas that are involved in this one, you really should give it a go and see what you think for yourself. So yeah, been really cool to do my first review from Harviestoun's kind of barrel aged series that they do, the Órach Slie, which is a really nice kind of a barrel aged lager. It's not a style you'd normally associate with barrel aging, right enough, but it's still really cool to try. So give it a go for yourself and see what you think. But as always, let me know in the comments section below your own thoughts on this beer and your favourite beers from the brewery. Of course, this guy's a really interesting kind of earthy lager actually. I really enjoy that, especially when it comes to whiskey. I like the earthy and almost smoky beers that you get here. But it's really nicely done. Give it a go because it is a special edition. And until the next time, it's Slanted Just Now. Do like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Check out my social media, but most importantly, make sure you try some of the Harviestoun beers, especially this barrel aged series, because they're pretty damn good. But I always enjoy reviewing my local craft beers. Until the next time, it's Slanted Just Now, and I will catch you soon. Cheers.